And we're back with another episode of the Learning Elevated podcast. I am so excited to be having another guest returning to the podcast for his second time. We have John Lay, CEO and Lead Analyst for Talented Learning. John, welcome back to the Learning Elevated podcast.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here again. Thank you.
So, John, let's kick things off. It's a new year when we're recording this. So let us know, first, let's level set, let us know kind of what you define as the extended enterprise. And can you let us know, what do you think 2021 has in store for learning in the extended enterprise?
Well, the extended enterprise learning technology market is the fastest growing and the most exciting segment in the learning systems marketplace, in my opinion. Extended enterprise refers to training strategically, training all those audiences that are interlocked with your organization, but may not be employees. And so most commonly that would translate to prospective customers and customers, channel partners that resell and service and supply your supply chain. And that would also include gig workers and employees, and any of the above is really corporate extended enterprise learning. And there's a lot of different ways organizations approach that, either holistically, so all the audiences at the same time, or each audience individually. So that's extended enterprise learning. It can be expanded definition to also include really anybody that's selling their content also. So any content provider, subject matter expert, even training company provider, certification provider that's creating and selling content would also be considered extended enterprise, because it's not your employees. What's 2021 bringing from an excitement and innovation standpoint? Really lots, because of the changes of 2020. Digital acceleration has moved more rapidly, or rather the acceleration of digital transformation has moved more rapidly in the last 10 months than it probably has in the last 5 years. And so organizations, I think, have known for a long time they wanted to transition into broader, holistic, extended enterprise of supporting more of their audiences with the same content and from the same system. But time and other priorities get in the way. But with the pandemic and quarantine and travel restrictions, it's really forced organizations to make an immediate pivot. And so that's resulted in a lot of organizations looking to expand their learning systems that they have in place, and if not able to find new learning systems to put in place to support more audiences and to complete that digital transformation sooner than later.
That is certainly word on the street. That's for sure. Everyone, it seems, if digital was not the focus pre-pandemic, it certainly is now. So what specifically should organizations be focusing on this year then, given what you've just explained to us so perfectly?
Well, I think it all depends on who you are. So I think if you are an HR and training professional that currently provides training of any sort to your employee audiences, it's really they've probably already have done this, but in the best interest to reach out to the other parts of the organization that maybe aren't so familiar, those that are in charge of the extended enterprise audiences, which would typically be sales professionals or the channel professionals or customer service, typically own external audiences, and find out what they're lacking right now, and kind of what their current situation is in terms of needing help. I think at this point, what organizations don't want to do is run off in 3 or 4 different directions at the same time, with all different organizations that own a different external audience going to purchase their own system. Now, certainly organizations do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But probably a wrong way to say, but the opportunity of all the changes here of the last year is that all these organizations have a triggering event to act at the same time. And so the best organizations, typically led by HR and training, are trying to embrace that process rather than let it splinter off, because once it splinters, it'll take a long time to pull it back together in the future. And so I think what organizations need to do is really collaborate with internal and external owners or stakeholders with learning audiences and figure out a way to do it together.
Yeah, the consolidation and, also just that reaching out and just speaking to all the folks that are going to be involved, that are going to have some sort of, measurable impact on their jobs and on what they do. That's so important. I'm curious, where do you currently see some of the other gaps that most organizations have currently when it comes to their extended enterprise learning?
Well, just because you want to have all your audiences on the same system doesn't mean that you've purchased the right system intentionally or accidentally to support that. And so I think a lot of organizations need to recognize that, especially external audiences have different needs in terms of user interface, ease of use, and overall workflow than they may be used to in pure employee type learning initiatives that are focused to solve compliance issues, where it's more of you have to do something, you have to take this training. Where with customers and prospects and partners, there's the much more of the carrot side of the equation of trying to entice people to want to do that. And so I think a lot of organizations, especially if they purchased 10 years ago or 7 years ago, there's a good chance that they're on an application that's kind of geared the old way, and with new audiences and everybody, all learning audiences, and really everybody, walking around with a smartphone in their hands at all times, has a certain expectation of what user experience would be inside or outside of training, mainly outside of training. And it's really important for organizations to put a foundation in place that embraces that, especially if they're going to be embracing the external audiences.
For sure. Yeah. And, I think this next question sort of ties what you just said into kind of the future state and the art of the possible, if you will. I know that based on, which industry you're in, or even your learning culture that you've already established or are looking to establish at your organization, there are different ways to measure success, right? So I'm curious about what you would say would be a good measure of success in 2021, right? Given the current situation and circumstances and the upcoming changes that need to be made, how can you ensure that what you do for your extended enterprise is successful?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good and a big question at the same time. I think it goes in stages, like most things in life. But with measurable successes, I think organizations first have to get their arms around their training analytics. So, from an element, the analytics that are available within the learning management system or a learning management system. So training progress, logins, training completions, number of content, all those things that LMSs are typically good at measuring. That's the first step of getting good at that and being able to measure that on a regular basis and use that to improve. The next step really is to tie business data with that training data. And that's where it gets fun, and that's where extended enterprise gets paid for. Because with customer audiences or prospective customer audiences or channel partners or really any external audience, there's a much quicker line to the measurement of consuming this training and measuring behavior. So, for example, with sales folks inside or outside external channel, you can see who has or who hasn't consumed this training or became certified, and really how that impacts metrics that are measured in something like a CRM. So, how many sales they have, how broad are the sales, how big are the sales, how long did it take them to close a particular sale. All those different metrics that sales organizations worry about, for example, can be combined with that training data. So what I see the best organizations, in a long roundabout way to answer your question, is going through those two phases of maturity and then getting through a process of really measuring and continuing to focus on those metrics that are helping their business forward. And sometimes that could be things like increased sales, or maybe increased customer retention, or decrease in support calls or support contacts. Any of those business metrics. That's the next step of it doesn't really matter to executives what your training completion ratio is. It matters how that translates to dollar and cents through increased sales performance. And so if you really want to be successful in extended enterprise, it's to get into that level of measurement, and that earns you the seat at the executive table.
So, John, one of the things we've been sort of discussing internally, and as we're bringing up on the podcast, is this idea of a learning culture. And the topic lends itself quite well to that sort of internal training use case, as you kind of have a corporate culture, and you're sort of maybe what I've heard a lot from our customers, is that they're shifting from the sort of the top down approach to a more self discovery, or there's different elements that can embed itself within what they want to achieve via their learning culture. I'm curious on your take. How can organizations create and really better their learning culture by leveraging the extended enterprise, and maybe even starting simply, how can you embed a culture of learning within your extended enterprise? And it varies by channel and by who you're training. But yeah, curious to get your take on the idea of a learning culture within the extended enterprise.
Mm-hmm. I guess there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I think one perspective might be to get a culture of learning from all those people inside your organization that are responsible for learning, regardless, and consumers are learning regardless of whether they're employees or not. And so, for example, the extended enterprise, so your prospective clients, your clients and your partners, they don't want to consume content that teaches them how to drive Microsoft Excel or use Word better. They're only consuming content that is proprietary to that particular organization. So your sales and your product knowledge, your new product rollouts, it always has to do with the organization itself. So there's a lot of self-centeredness to any extended enterprise content that's out there. But the convenient thing is that content is also relevant to all customer facing and really almost all employees inside a given organization. So being able to embrace really all three pieces of that, and always be thinking of when you're developing content, to think about how that is impacting and can impact all of your different audiences simultaneously, and to always solicit that input from those different audiences as you're creating and rolling out that content. So it can be self-serve, it can be prescribed in a learning path or a daily feed, or it could be organized into a formal certification. But really looking at all those audiences simultaneously allows you to create content strategically and holistically, and that starts the process of transforming to a learning culture. I don't think it's a point as much as a process for all organizations to continually move down that path. I think if that happens, or when that happens, it makes the other side of the equation, which is a community of your customers or a community of your partners to embrace that culture of learning also. And I think the way to make that happen is, one, listen to those audiences and find out what they really need from a content perspective, and two, deliver it in a really easy, straightforward way that adds value, and always focus on adding value for those for those audiences. And with the external audiences, I think it's easier to build the culture of learning, because if you're always providing value on how to use or service or sell or think about or expand that proprietary products and services that you're selling, you're always providing the value that they originally came to your organization for in the first place.
If the value is there, they will come.
They always will. They always will.
I love it. Yeah. So, typically there are trends that exist in the LMS world. I know you've been in the game for some time now, so you probably could tell us what they were 5 years ago, but we want to know what the upcoming trends are. And since you have such a finger on the pulse, we want to hear, in extended enterprise specifically, what are some of the kind of buzzwords or trends that you know of?
Mm-hmm. So there's lots of trends, of course, but and they all somewhat never go away. So they happen simultaneously. Our trends post now is up to like 15 or 18 things a year that we're tracking that's going on. But I think if you had to boil it down, it's the personalization of learning. And that personalization, hyper personalization, adaptive learning, they all can be synonyms for that same concept, but it is to tailor that LMS experience for that particular type of user. And historically, we've done that with, what's your job title? Are you an employee? Kind of in a real macro way. And a lot of times focused on compliance, but it's different now. It's focused on things and actions and events that are happening outside of the LMS. But have you visited a website? Did you download this white paper? Did you attend and stop by the booth? Do you own this product? There's a million different triggers that can be used to then adapt the learning experience, the platform itself, and then the learning content, the what's inside the particular content. And that can be, what content you have access to. That could be the path through the content that's recommended. It could be just showing you content that's based on the purchases that you made and not weighing you down with, the broader library. But that ability to use actions outside the LMS to drive the personalized experience has really kicked it up a notch, and is particularly important in extended enterprise learning. And it's really happens unbeknownst to most people in your life with CRMs and visiting any website and undergoing any marketing campaign. All that is personalized, and that's come to learning. So that's probably one. I think the other big trend that as the pendulum swings back is that content authoring in LMSs is becoming the desired path. So for a lot of years, they were really two separate things. You had an authoring tool and you had an LMS, and you use SCORM or XAPI or something to hook the two up in a standards-based way. But particularly in extended enterprise learning, because of all that content being proprietary to your organization and you're not getting it off the shelf, you have to create that content. And so if the initiative, as we started out today, is being driven by training in HR, they're probably going to continue the path of using third-party authoring tools, Articulate or, something akin to develop that content. But if those business units are going rogue or going independent, the customer service group or the channel partner group, they're going to find LMSs that do exactly what they want. And so the combination of really thinking about those two different divergence of those groups is really one of the better success metrics there.
John, one thing you said earlier, and I kind of want to double click back on it, and it actually does speak to the idea of, the whole content creation and how you go about it. You mentioned listening to your audiences, and I'm wondering if you have any recommendations for the L&D pros out there on, what can they do to listen to their audience to make sure that they're delivering the right type of content, in the extended enterprise when you're doing the subject matter expert and the product specific content. What are some of the best practices that you've seen in how you can listen to your audience to deliver what they really want?
Well, I think surveying your audience, and there's a lot of ways to do that, but it's easy to think what your audience wants and to come up with a conception, especially if you've been at your organization for a long time, of what that audience wants and needs. But very often it's different than what they're thinking now, and especially since all rules and all things have changed here over the last year. It's really important to reach out and to survey them, and how you do that. There's a lot of different techniques that you can use, from, actually surveying or having forums, or, having direct content with the sales folks or the customer service folks, or anecdotally, but understanding, what they think of what you have right now, and really in an ideal world, what would be different, from their perspective. As simple as that is, that's advice I hear all the time from professionals that live their life as a practitioner, and it often unveils things that you're not thinking, for sure.
I think often sometimes the most obvious answer is actually the best answer. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
To some degree,
Yeah.
you might even be scared to ask sometimes.
Yes.
You're
Yes.
just scared what you might hear back, like feedback on this podcast, for example.
Yes. So true. We don't want to know. Just keep it to yourselves.
Right. Exactly.
I
Less is
love it.
positive, please.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah. So in terms of like going back to the trends and kind of what's up and coming, what overall, and this is again a big question, so apologies, but what impact does extended enterprise bring to the learning culture as a whole in an organization? I know that's a big one.
So what impact does extended enterprise bring to the organization as a whole?
Yeah, the learning culture.
I think it's about thinking of learning as a competitive differentiator. I think when you become old and grizzled like myself, it's easy. A lot of people from my generation thought that training was kind of more of a mandatory or necessary evil versus anything strategic. Something that you gave your employees to stay out of regulatory trouble. And certainly, some organizations were more progressive than that, but that's always been the case. But because extended enterprise is measurable, highly measurable, there's no doing it and just hoping that something happens. You can almost see immediately what's working and what's not, and constantly change course on that and get better. And that's the same thing that a business does in general. At all different levels of the organization. And so extended enterprise allows training then to adjust and morph to the business and become a differentiator in the process, a differentiator in the marketing process, a differentiator in the sales process, a differentiator in the customer or onboarding process, all the way throughout the organization. And so learning isn't just something that people tolerate for, it's something that is a vehicle that allows your organization to succeed in a measurable way. And professionals that specialize in extended enterprise, they get judged and measured by the increase in performance of how they're moving those needles and metrics. And so bringing that visibility of the impact to everybody in your organization really allows that organization to get excited about having an impact in the different areas of the organization. And because the impact can be so broad across so many different venues inside an organization, to use this training strategically, it's fun. It's an exciting career to be able to have that type of opportunity. And almost no other function, or very few functions, go across so many different levels and audiences in an organization. And finally now, it's mandatory. And so if your competitors are doing it, or your competitor are doing it and you're not, or you're doing it poorly and your experience is not, the reverse is true. It's an anti-differentiator. It's a reason not to invest and why to go to one of your competitors. And so all of this was theoretical, and then it became kind of nice to have and the most progressive. And now if you're not doing it, you're way behind.
So John, you mean you've had your finger to the pulse over the last year, which has brought on, so many changes to every organization. And you're really able to sort of see all the different elements that are available to organizations in learning technology. So my sort of final question to cap this off is, what's one feature that's become more popular in an extended enterprise from a learning technology perspective that you maybe didn't expect as we roll into 2021?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of like the flip side of the what's hot. So the hyper personalization and the content development within the LMS platform that we talked about. Something I see more and more now is that concept of intra LMS commerce. And I think a lot of folks will think, oh, you put a shopping cart up and it's commerce, but I mean like real commerce, not just B2C or selling to individuals, but running a whole business of selling and distributing your content. And so that includes the ability to bulk purchase in a variety of ways, and the ability to automatically spin up customer portals or member portals, or custom, interfaces based on that bulk purchase, and populate the users and make it easy from single sign-on, and populate the learning paths and give delegated administrators of that organization insight into their people and the people management and their progress of the training, and allow those organizations to basically open up the same thing for other sub-organizations, resellers, and so forth, so that you can support selling to individuals, selling to businesses with learners, and then selling to resellers that sell to businesses with learners. And so content producers and folks that are really trying to reach all their channels, want to have a strategy that goes across all those different venues, because creating content is expensive and distributing it has a shelf life. And so LMSs now are really embracing and getting better and better at running the B2C, B2B, and B2B2B segments of distributing content. And that's just something that you won't see in a talent management system. They just would have no concept of that.
That makes sense. Well, John, as always, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast here today. We so appreciate it. And, we'll be sure to have you back for an episode in the future.
Outstanding. It was great to be here again, and love coming back and sharing what's going on in the front lines of the extended enterprise LMS space.
Thank you so much, John. It's always such a treat to hear from you.
Outstanding. Thanks. We'll see you soon.
For more information on what we've discussed today, including links to resources and downloadable assets, go to docebo.com/podcast. That's docebo.com/podcast. And while you're there, subscribe to our newsletter.
You can also find us on iTunes, Spotify, and all other places where you listen to podcasts by searching Learning Elevated. Don't forget to click subscribe so you know when we're disembarking on another floor.